You're watching viewer-supported WYIN Gary Maryville.
Good morning, I'm Kadon Williams. Welcome to Just Around the Corner, brought to you by the town of Munster, Indiana. Just Around the Corner features stories about your community, its people, and events throughout the WYIN viewing area. So don't go away. Come along with us as we go just around the corner to Schneider, Indiana for a visit to the Huber Sod Farm. Hi, I'm Don Williams. We have come this gorgeous sunny day to Schneider, Indiana, to the Huber Sod Farm. And with me is John Huber, owner of the farm. And I'm going to start out, John, by asking you how you got started in the sod business, and did you purchase this land, or how did you come into this area?
Well, back in 1947, my grandfather purchased the land at an auction, and he was in the trucking business, but his love was for cattle, and cattle breeding is what he got into, and made many trips down to Texas to gather a herd of registered polled Herefords. He, at its peak, had a registered herd of 50 white-faced polled Herefords, and this property did generate 3 national champions.
Out of his endeavors with the cattle herd?
Correct.
Okay. Now, how large is the farm?
It's 820 acres. It's a mile by a mile and a half. And from one corner to the opposite kitty corner is 2 miles, and there's only 6 inches of fall. So we're about as flat as it gets.
I guess it is. Now, let's talk about some of the general operating features of the farm in terms of what equipment you use and just general things that people might like to know about sod development and farming.
Well, we start out with disking the ground, plowing. We run a laser grader across the field to, when you have so little fall, it's important to have your fields as flat as possible, because water tends to stand in the lowest area, and that's where sod will not thrive. That's a source for weeds, and you aren't able to harvest those areas. So it's good to have a very consistent, a very consistent field.
Okay. Now, one thing you're talking about cultivating the sod in terms of the water supply and everything. I presume then that you must, I'm going to call it irrigate for lack of a better word, watering, I guess.
Yes, we irrigate quite a bit here, and we're lucky to have a water source. We're just 1 mile north of the Kankakee River, and the water table is only 4 feet down. We have a 7-acre irrigation lake that was produced when they dug the overpass that goes on Route 41 over the railroad tracks on the southern end of the farm. And we've dug a 2-acre lake on the other side of Route 41. And we have an underground main line that services all of the fields. And we primarily use wheel lines that attach to the risers every 120 feet.
Now, as we can show, the wheel line is these long pipes you see as you drive down the highway that roll along, correct?
That's correct. They can be as long as a half mile, and they just have one single mover in the center that moves the entire line simultaneously, and it is set in one place for an hour to an hour and a half. Then they shut down the line, let it drain, and then move it to the procedures.
Okay. I'd like to move right along now and talk about some of the advantages of grass. Everyone has grass in their yard. Well, most everyone. I have weeds. but that's my problem. Anyhow, most everyone wants to have a beautiful lawn, but they don't want to do anything. So let's just go down the line and talk about the advantages of having a nice lawn. And we just talked about water, so let's talk about how grass works in your yard in terms of water.
Well, turf grass does prevent water from running off. It soaks up the water instead of letting it cause erosion. If you have a bare ground area with a little bit of a slope, the water is going to cause a lot of erosion, whereas with turf grass, it slows the rate of movement for the water and soaks it up and keeps it in place.
Okay, how about one that I note here that kind of interested me, comfort and energy conservation. Let me try that again. Comfort and energy conservation. What's that all about?
Well, if you have bare ground, black dirt, asphalt, cement, it's going to radiate the heat, and if that's around your house, it's going to cause the temperature inside your house to be much warmer during the summer than if you had grass surrounding it. It's nature's air conditioner is what grass is. It just, in comparison to the alternative, it's much cooler in the summer.
Okay, I never thought of that. How about all plants, as we know, generate oxygen, and I presume grass is no exception?
Yes, it's quite a dense population of plants that give off oxygen. There are plenty of statistics on how much oxygen it gives off, but needless to say, it's a significant provider.
Right, so it's part of our environment. As we know, you and I and all other animals breathe oxygen and give out carbon dioxide, and I believe green plants do just the opposite. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then, of course, how can it affect your soil in your yard? You put the sod down and it's there, and that's all I think of.
Well, turf grass plant sheds old growth that contributes to the organic material in your soil. And as you mow your yard, the clippings, it's best to leave them lay. That can add the nitrogen back to the grass plants to help them grow. But over time, if you have a barren soil and you're growing turf grass over it, it will significantly contribute to the organic matter in the soil.
Okay, what do you do here on the sod farm then in terms of your conservation? Because I think of sod as removing part of the topsoil, and if I do that, how many times, where am I to the point where I can't sod farm anymore and the land is basically useless?
Okay, one of the most frequently asked questions that we get is how soon we're going to have to replace the topsoil. And this is our 35th year in the sod business, and we have not yet had to replace any soil. As a matter of fact, our soil level is the same as our neighbors' soil level who have not been producing sod in the same amount of time. And the reason for that is that we only remove 1/3 of an inch from the surface, and the majority of that 1/3 of an inch is root mass. And the rest, the bushy part of the root system, extends down at least 10 inches below the surface. And that stays in the soil and adds to the soil, adds volume to the soil. And another aspect that people are not familiar with is that it takes 2 years to produce a crop of sod. It's many people think that we're harvesting 3 times a year or something like that, and it's every other year that we'll harvest off a crop of sod. So it's not being harvested as frequently as people would think. And it's also a soil conserving crop where on a windy day, our neighbors may have row crops, and the wind can grab that soil, send it in the air, and it deposits right in our sod field, and we like to call it exchanging real estate.
So you kind of get topsoil from your neighbors just through the course of wind and nature.
Yes, I'd like to thank them for that at this moment.
I'm sure they're going to love to hear that one. They probably never thought about that. Okay, let's get into some of the projects now. As you said, you started in the mid-'60s, and with any developing enterprise, it takes time to get going. So what are some of the neat projects that you have done in the past that have promoted sod farming for your corporation?
We have a unique soil type that is 75 to 85% sand that is ideal for athletic fields and golf courses. And that has allowed us to supply many athletic fields that are primarily sand-based subsoils. And back in '88, when the Bears converted over from an artificial turf to a natural turf, they chose us as the supplier. And we've provided sod to most of the Big Ten teams. Down Purdue being just an hour south of us, they use only our sod on the campus as well as in their athletic fields and the practice fields. And we've worked with the Cleveland Indians, with the Milwaukee Brewers, and coming up this fall, we're going to be providing sod over to Olivet Nazarene College, where the new Bears preseason practice facility is going in.
Okay, what about things like golf courses? They're famous for grass. Whether it's this kind of sod, I don't know. Could you comment on that?
Yes, our sandy soil also is good for growing creeping bent grass, which they use on golf course greens. And so back in 1980, we started growing bent grass as well as bluegrass. And we've provided sod for most of the larger golf courses in the area, and including PGA Championship courses of recent years. And we ship all over the country. We've shipped as far as Palm Desert, California, down to Dallas, Texas, and other southern states out east. Quite often we have to ship in refrigerated trucks, but we advertise nationally, and there are very few sod growers that grow the creeping bent grass sod. And also something that we'll talk about a little bit later is the service that we provide where we remove all the soil from the sod to let it root better and drain better in pure sand subsoils.
Okay, now we've talked about creeping bent grass and of course bluegrass, and those are probably the two most known and common grasses in this area. But there are grasses that you shouldn't grow in our climate, and grasses that would not apply themselves to the soil conditions in the areas you service. Is that correct?
Yes, we're in a cool season area, the northern climate of the United States. The southern grasses are further south, and the transition zone begins right around Indianapolis and goes down to northern Tennessee. There's a lot of warm season grasses that people try and grow in the transition zone, and they stay dormant the majority of the year and will green up for about 3 months in the summer. As far as cool season grasses go, bluegrass has rhizomes that will establish new plants. Grasses like ryegrass and fescue are bunch-type grasses. If you have excessive wear on the area, the plants will not establish new plants like a bluegrass lawn will. The rhizomes, you don't see them, they're underground, but as soon as they sense sunlight hitting the ground above them, they'll send up new plants to initiate new growth in those areas.
That's very interesting, and I would imagine that's something a lot of people don't think about or know. Now, we've talked pretty much about the production of soil, irrigation, fertilization, and so forth, mowing with mulching and so on. I would like to just touch very briefly on harvesting methods, how you pick the sod up that we're standing on to deliver to a customer, and then I'd like to conclude by talking to all of the homeowners out here that want to know, how do I get a beautiful green weedless lawn and keep it that way? So let's first talk about the methods of harvesting the sod.
Well, it's back in '66, we had to use a walk-behind sod cutter, and you had to lift them off the ground, put them on your shoulder, and hand load them onto the truck.
You mean the bundles or the strips or whatever?
The rolls of sod, yes. And back then we were still in hog and cattle production, and we'd take the straight truck with hogs in the morning to market, come back, load it up with sod, and deliver it to our landscape customers, and they'd always comment on how funny our sod smelled. Since those days, we have gotten out of livestock production, and a man named Jerry Brower up in Canada invented a machine that automated the sod production method, and it is 1 square yard per roll and stacked on pallets, generally 75 yards per pallet. And we use a system that allows us to avoid the use of pallets, where it uses a series of 6 forks that goes underneath the stack of sod. More recently, they have developed the method of harvesting big roll, which is wider and longer. And the particular method we use is 42 inches wide by 129 feet long, putting 50 square yards on 1 roll. And it is installed mechanically. You can install using a track machine or a 3-point hitch attachment on the back of a tractor.
I would imagine that would be good for grades along highways and things like that. Is that correct?
Highways, athletic fields, golf courses, cemeteries, parks. But the equipment has gotten so good and so maneuverable that you can also install it into home yards as well.
Okay, let's go to the consumer that has his 150 by 80 foot lot or whatever he has, and talk about first the preparation he should do, if any, before the sod arrives, and then how to care for it so that, as we talked, he doesn't get all kinds of stray grass and dandelions and clover and all of the other things that make grass look like a weed field.
Well, initially you want to work up the soil as if you were seeding, and you would start out by rototilling or somehow working up the ground to eliminate any compaction that is accumulated. And it'd be a good time to determine what the pH of your soil is, because you can correct that through lime or sulfur.
Let's tell people what pH means. It's acidity or non-acidity, I believe.
Correct. Your ideal range is 6.5 to 7, which is neutral. And the reason that is important is because nutrients are unavailable to the plants when your pH is too far, too low or too high. And the pH is normally hard to correct after the sod is installed very quickly. You can gradually correct the pH of your soil, but it has to work through the sod layer before it gets down to the soil.
Okay, I sort of interrupted your train of thought there, so let's go on now after we've adjusted the pH of the soil, which sounds technical and complicated, but I'm sure it's not. Then what?
Okay, you should have a soil test done to determine if there are any nutrient deficiencies. And you can correct those deficiencies by rototilling them, rototilling your phosphorus, potassium, or any micronutrients that are lacking in your soil. Just rototill them right into your soil so that when the sod comes, it'll have a good environment to thrive in. Most importantly, you need to make sure your grade is correct, that the water drains the way it should, that you have adequate drainage in place, and it's a good idea to put in an irrigation system prior to putting in your sod. There is going to be some settling of the soil after you work up the soil, so it's a good idea to let some rains hit it or irrigate the soil so it'll settle, and then correct any water standing areas with regrading that area.
Is there any time of the year that's best to lay your sod, spring, summer, fall, or does it not matter?
As long as the ground is tillable, that's a good time to lay sod. Early in the spring, it may still be dormant, but as soon as the soils warm up, it'll turn green, take root, and do fine. The very hot summer months, very hot period in the summer when, like late July, you should only put down sod if you have adequate irrigation or if you have a lot of shade in the area, a lot of shade trees that can protect the sod.
All right, now let's finally, the sod is in and it's a year or two later and we've tried to do what we need to do, and let's describe what that would be for maintaining our sod so that it lasts for the lifetime of our yard and our home.
Well, in the spring it is important to put down a crabgrass preventer, a pre-emergent that kills annual grass seeds as they germinate. That'll keep your lawn free from crabgrass and other annual weeds. And it's important not to fertilize too early in the spring. A lot of people get spring fever and want to put down fertilizer right out of the box in the springtime. It's best to wait till it comes out of dormancy and has about a 2-week flush of growth. It has to go through that before it can benefit from the fertilizer application. If you put down the fertilizer too soon or just as it's coming out of dormancy, all of the nitrogen goes toward top growth, and it actually needs to pull from its reserves in the root system to support the top growth. So it's best to wait till mid to late May to put down your first application of fertilizer.
All right, that's interesting because I had always heard that, I guess it's a brand name, but Holtz, or the chemical that suppresses crabgrass particularly, should be put down mid-April. Am I wrong on that?
No, that is correct. You should be putting down the crabgrass preventer in the first part of April, even late March if it's been an early spring. You will benefit from the phosphorus and potassium that you put down with that application. The nitrogen is probably going to be volatilized into the air, will not give you much benefit. You can get crabgrass preventers without fertilizer, but it's not going to harm the grass if you fertilize before it comes out of dormancy. It's when it is just coming out of dormancy that it will cause the plant to go under stress if it's just coming out of dormancy.
Okay, now you gave me a neat little formula for remembering when to put fertilizer down. You told me 4 times a year. Let's share with our viewers how to remember without having to write on a calendar and say, oh, what's today, do I have to fertilize?
Well, we call it the Holiday Fertilizer Program, and it starts on Memorial Day and continues 4th of July, Labor Day, and Halloween. And it basically puts the fertilizer applications about 6 weeks apart, which is about what you want to do.
Okay, and we talked about the crabgrass prevention in late March, early April. What about broadleaf environments that, or varmints, broadleaf plants that just love to come into our yard?
Well, generally, all of those broadleaves have come up by mid to late May, and your first application can be a weed and feed. And it's important to put down that weed and feed application when the plants are wet so that the granules will stick to especially the broadleaves. And you can do that early in the morning when there's still dew on the ground, or you can irrigate the area so that the leaves are wet, and that will get rid of the majority of those broadleaf weeds.
Okay, well, we've covered an awful lot of material here in a very short time, and if people that viewed this show are like I am, they tend to not remember everything they just saw and heard. So let's supply people with a number that they can contact for additional information, particularly about lawn care and the length of time they need to give notice to prepare their base before they put the sod down.
At Huber Ranch Sod Nursery, we have a very easy-to-remember phone number. It's 219-552-0552. And we also have a very informative webpage. It's www.hubersod.com.
All right. And of course, if you live way out beyond the range where you want to contact someone closer, you can do that also. And of course, Huber are the experts in this area, and even if they don't supply you, they certainly can answer your questions through their phone line or through their website. Is there any final comment you'd like to make, John?
Yes. Sod is the answer. What's your question?
That's a tricky one. I love that. It's sure a lot better than seeding and spending 2.5 years getting a grass that looks like your neighbor's that became instantly beautiful overnight, isn't it?
Yes, and there's one other thing. Life is short. Sod it.
Okay. With those words of wisdom, I'm going to thank John Huber for spending time here at his sod farm to tell us all about the production of sod, the application of sod, and the care of your lawn once the sod is in and beautiful. From Schneider, Indiana, I'm Kadon Williams. Just Around the Corner is produced by the town of Munster, Indiana. Give us a call at area 219-836-6915 and tell us what you would like to see on our show. On behalf of all of us here at our Munster Television studio, I'm Kadon Williams. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us again next Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. when we will feature host Carol Moore with an exciting story from the Gary-Chicago Airport showing the support operations for the Chicago Air and Water Show.
And now, another digital bit with Bob Trent.